And the market feels, as far as provision of public goods are concerned, because of what we call the free rider problem, where people can consume the good without paying for it. And that leads to a free rider problem. There are a number of ways that we can address the free rider problem. I'll discuss that briefly in a jiffy. But to also let you know that when we say non-rival, it also implies that it will be socially undesirable to limit people from consuming a good that is non-rival in consumption. Non-rival in consumption means the addition of one extra user does not reduce the quantity available to others. Once the quantity available to others is not reduced, that also means the marginal cost of extra user is zero. And if marginal cost of extra user is zero, then excluding somebody from not consuming the good will be socially undesirable, because a good for which it is non-rival in consumption, if you limit or you exclude somebody from consuming it, will lead to underutilization. And so, again, we say it is undesirable when the good is non-rivalry to exclude people from consuming it. The next point I want to make, point 4, as a summary from what we did last week, is what we call the Samuelsonian condition. I forgot, I didn't tell you the name we give to that condition, where we sum up, we add all the marginal rate of substitution of individuals and we equate to the marginal cost to be able to determine how many efficient units of a public good can be provided if people are willing to pay some amount for them for this. And that condition is referred to as the Samuelsonian condition. So last time we were trying to explore that Samuelsonian condition, where we have some example there. So for instance, Samuelsonian condition in solving B here will require that we add all the prices added here will give us it's the same as adding the marginal rate of technical substitution, a marginal rate of substitution of the various individuals, and we equate this to the marginal cost of 1,700. If we do that, then we say we are using the Samuelsonian condition of optimal provision of public goods to solve that question. So Samuelsonian follows after one Nobel Prize economist called Paul Samuelson. So it's often referred to as Samuelsonian condition. But I want to draw your minds to something. Radio broadcast is non-rival and non-excludable in consumption. So ordinarily, in principle, we say that government provision is what will work. But radio broadcast FM stations are provided by private individuals. The despies, the Questions, and etc., who are providing a lot of these radio and FM stations. So, do we say that the theory doesn't apply here? Possibly we can say it's more or less seems like an exception to the rule, but it's not actually an exception here. What happens is that the radio broadcast, yes, it is non-excludable, it is non-rival in consumption, it's a public good, and maybe we can say it's pure public good also. But the producer, the provider, the private sector providers of radio broadcasts are leveraging on adverts to elicit direct sale of broadcast to consumers. So what they do is, instead of making you the consumers who are supposed to consume the radio broadcast, they, they roll out adverts so that the companies that buy these advertisement slots or commercial breaks for adverts to be run pay indirectly for the consumers who listen to these radio stations and even sometimes free-to-air television stations. So through that mechanism, once you are listening to an advert, it means that you are paying indirectly for the radio service that you are listening to. So through the medium of adverts, for instance, your eyeballs are supposed to be paying for such a kind of services and your ears and your eyeballs and your ears usually pay for such service indirectly. So once you listen to the advert, then it means you are making payment for such radio broadcasts. And then the payment made by the firms that send the adverts there is used to make payment for this radio broadcast. So although it is non-excludable, it is non-rival in consumption, still through this indirect advert way and advertisement or advert slots, the private broadcast people are able to do so. I was preparing for our next lecture yesterday, and I just thought that I should draw your minds to some learning applications as far as the public goods situation are concerned. And you realize that we say whenever the market fails, government intervention is necessary, but sometimes entrepreneurs that wish to make a profit can take advantage of these profit opportunities by finding innovative ways to overcome the sources of market failure. So when the market fails such that there's likelihood that there will be no provision or under provision due to the free rider problem, innovative methods of overcoming this free rider problem, which causes people not to pay for it, can be exploited by or can be explored by private markets to efficiently provide some of these public goods. And one way of doing that is what I've just told you in the last bullet of the previous slide, where they can sell adverts and be able to raise resources to pay for the radio broadcast, although it's a public good. Another way is also to find alternative payment mechanisms to circumvent charging the final consumers. So, for instance, we can find another method which the market can overcome the free rider problem as through bundling public goods with private goods, what we call tie-in sale. So, if you know, okay, the public good, people will not be willing to pay for it, the free rider problem will be there, then you can produce a public good and add a private good to it and sell them together, tie-in sale, so that the person who is buying the private good will also indirectly buy the public good. Example is the manuals for laptops and electronic devices that are often sent to us. Those manuals are more or less non-excludable, non-rival in consumption. So they share some level of public characteristics. If somebody wants to just produce manuals, people will not be willing to pay for manuals on their own. But with the sale of computer software, with a manual attached to it, then you see that the computer software or the computer is private good, but the manual is a public good, so it is tied in there, and then now you pay for the computer or the software, you are paying for the manual as well. So those are some of the ways by which private entrepreneurs can outwit or find alternative payment mechanisms to circumvent the free rider problem or the inability to charge final consumers for public goods. And you also observe that when you go to shopping malls, oftentimes they provide some public goods like restrooms, common areas that are paid through mainly higher rental. For instance, you go to Accra Mall, they have some places that people can just hang out. Some people sit on the aisles or blah, blah, blah. And then those are free, more or less public goods that you have there. But the providers of those spaces do not exact price from people who use them. So it's public good, but they take the prices or they charge for those things indirectly through higher rental prices for the mall or the slots that are in the mall. So it becomes a way of trying to outwit the inability of people to pay for typically public goods in that situation. So the private entrepreneur who is interested in such area must find a way to extract payment indirectly from consumers of such places. In neighborhoods, when we have associations, in condominiums, with apartments, complexes, and etc., they also provide some public goods like pools, parks, meeting facilities, and then fitness facilities, and etc., or playgrounds for children, and etc. But oftentimes, this is also charged through higher rental rates that the people who live in a condominium are supposed to pay. So once you move in there, the money, the payment for the public good that is provided there is tied into the higher rates or rents that you pay. So in the end, you see if you go into such apartments and you are not using those public goods, it means you are paying for others to be using them. So these are the ways by which the private sector often tries to induce some coercive payment for public goods so that they can provide them. Once you can coerce people to pay for the public good, private sector will be able to provide. So now today we're going to look at externalities. Externalities is another reason why the market will fail in bringing out efficient output. Efficient output is usually the output that satisfies the product mix, where the output that is desired by the consumers is what the firms are producing. We call it the product mix efficiency. So if the consumers desire, let's say 3,000 units and the firms are producing 3,000 units, then we have that kind of efficiency, market efficiency. But there are times where, because of externalities, the market may underproduce or overproduce. Underproduce means they produce less than the individuals or society demands. Overproduce means they produce more than the individuals or society demand. These situations are usually the result of what we call externalities. And that is what we are going to study about today. I am going to introduce the topic of externality to you from different perspectives. As you might have realized from your course outline, we have different textbooks that we are using and other materials. So I decided to not just pick one side definition or one definition from a textbook for you, but I picked the analysis as it's put in different textbooks. So we'll look at different viewpoints or different ways of looking at externality as I think 3 or 4 textbooks that I provide their perspectives as part of our lecture for today. So the first perspective says that an externality refers to the uncompensated impact of one person's action on the well-being of a bystander or a third party. So if one individual is taking an action based on his private benefit and therefore concerned about his private costs, and this private benefit, private costs affects the well-being of somebody who is not party to this decision, somebody who is a third party, somebody who is a bystander, then we refer to this as externality when the impact is uncompensated for, which means when you are able to compensate for the impact, then there is a likelihood that you will be addressing externality as well. So when we come to solutions to externalities, you see that one of the ways to do that is to do is to compensate for the one who is suffering or the one who is enjoying the benefit as a result of the external, as a result of activities of somebody who is carrying out such things in his own private interest. Private interest here means that the person is concerned about his private cost and then private benefit. But it ends up that the person's activity will either incur some extra cost to society, which we call the marginal external cost, or some people say external costs. And also the activity may contribute to some level of support or external benefits to others. So we have such situations. Again, we can say that externality arises, I'm talking about bullet point 2, when a person engages in an activity that influences the well-being of a bystander, and yet neither pays nor receives any compensation for that. So you engage in an activity, this influences the well-being of a bystander, but that bystander, if it affects him positively, he doesn't receive or he doesn't pay anything for it as a compensation. If it affects him negatively, he doesn't receive any compensation for that. In that situation, we say that there is an externality. When the impact on the bystander is adverse, it's bad, it doesn't help the bystander, we say we have negative externality. For instance, automobiles happen to emit exhaust. If you drive behind a diesel car or a petrol car who has a gasket problems, or when the gasket is leaking, it will be making a lot of smokes through like that. And if you are behind and you don't roll up your grass, what it means is that the person is going to give you negative externality. You can inhale those fumes, and if care is not taken, you fall sick, and this affects your well-being. Cigarette smoking, the research shows that if you stand by somebody who is smoking cigarettes, the person inhaling, smoking inhales only 20%, but 80% goes out to those who are around. So that's clearly a negative externality there. Barking dogs, if you live in a community or a neighborhood where there are these wild dogs and sometimes they bark a lot in the night, and you are a researcher, for instance, of which you have to stay overnight and read your articles and be able to come out with new knowledge and etc. You will not be able to concentrate. This will disturb you a lot. This is a negative externality to you. Loud music, people who play loud music in their neighborhood and etc. can also do some negative externality to those who are in the neighborhood. And when the impact on a bystander is positive or beneficial, then we say we have a positive externality. For instance, immunization. If you get yourself immunized, you reduce the chances of infecting the others with communicable diseases. And in this case, you see that your immunization yields external benefit to people in the community. And in that case, you see you are generating positive externalities. What about new technologies? Of course, sometimes when new technology comes, they also influence the production possibilities of other firms without them making payment for them. And this is a kind of positive externality as well. Attributes such as honesty is also a positive externality, because if somebody is honest, it feeds into others' consumption or others' well-being without them making any direct payment or making a compensation for that. So we can have what we call negative externalities and positive externalities. And when negative externalities lead to market failure, they make markets overproduce or produce larger than what is socially desirable. So society might desire that, and they produce this based on production means efficiency, but the market will produce larger quantities than that. Or when positive externalities are concerned, the market will produce smaller quantity than the socially desirable level. So negative externalities, overproduction, positive externalities, underproduction, and these are market failures because they deviate from the optimal social level of output that one will be interested in. From another perspective, we say externalities involve the creation of a service or the service in the process of production or consumption of goods or services, which is extended to an intended group of consumers or producers. So we can say when a production process or consumption of goods and services create a service or disservice to others, and this disservice or service is extended to an intended group of consumers or producers, then we say we have externality problem here. So again, externalities can result from this service or disservice to market participants. Please give me 2 minutes. It's raining here, so I have to close my windows. Okay, thank you. So we can also say in bullet point 2, externalities describe a situation where a good or service is produced or consumed, and those who consume them do not pay for such goods as external benefit to them, or those who are suffering the suffering for the production or those external costs are not compensated. They are not paid for what they suffer as far as the external issues are concerned. So we call it externality. Obviously, there are externalities in consumption and production. So from this perspective, we are looking at externalities in consumption and production, such that if one individual's consumption increases the quantity or satisfaction of another individual, then we say there is positive externality. Or if one firm's production increases the production possibilities of another firm, then we say there is a positive externality. Example, and the positive externalities are also sometimes referred to as external economies. And in that case, examples are information flow, honesty, and knowledge discovery, prevention of communicable diseases, and etc. So As I told you, I explained honesty already. Information flow, when one firm produces and this makes information, the same information flow to another firm and etc. This becomes positive externality. And knowledge discovery is such that once the knowledge is discovered and it is made available to others, then they benefit from it without paying for it. So it's also prevention of communicable disease. If one individual consumption reduces the satisfaction of another, or one firm's production activities reduce the production possibilities of another firm, this is termed as external diseconomies or negative externalities. And negative externalities usually are accompanied by some noise. For instance, if the production of one individual creates noise that disturbs the ability or production possibilities of another individual, we say that's a negative externality. Pollution. Firms that produce and pollute the atmosphere are likely to also cause negative externalities to bystanders or other firms in the market. So generally, if an action by one agent affects directly or indirectly the well-being or production possibilities of other agents, but this is chosen without regard to the consequences to other agents, we refer to this as externality. So this is another perspective of externality. Let me just take a feedback from you. It's raining heavily here. Are you able to hear me?
Not really. Your voice is far behind.
Is it raining at your end too?
No, raining heavily here.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's raining here.
I don't know what we should do. Otherwise, we have to call off the lecture and reschedule for another period in the week.
I want to
Can't hear me, that is what we should do. I can hardly hear you. That's why.
Oh, sir, you can hear you.
Okay. If the consensus is that you can hear me, we'll continue until, in Ghana, when it's raining, there will be light off. And if the light goes off and my router is off, then it means we can't continue.
Let's
For now, it's on, so let's continue.
Okay.
All right, so this is another perspective that I share from another textbook as far as externality is concerned. And we can explain externality further as usually associated with an action by a firm or a consumer that affects the well-being or the welfare of others, positively or negatively. And this is also another way of explaining or defining externalities. And we can say externalities also arises when an economic actor does not face the correct price for taking a specific action. What we mean by the correct price of an action is the correct price is the marginal social cost or marginal social benefit of an action. That is the correct price of the item. And I saw this correct price way of defining externality from the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, United States of America, where they look at it this way, that an externality arises when an economic actor does not face the correct price for taking a specific action. And the correct price refers to what is referred to as marginal social cost, or the cost to society, or the benefit to society as large. This is the correct price that does it. So when the private cost or private benefit deviates from the social cost or social benefit, then we say an externality results. So So far, that is what externality basically means, where uh, the action of a firm or a consumer affects somebody else's welfare without any compensation made for such. We can look at several types of externalities. We have what we call pecuniary externality, where a third-party effect that occurs through the pricing mechanism. For instance, when you go to US, you often see McDonald's opening up a shop next to Burger King. And sometimes you see those, and you realize that, can we say this is an externality? Yes, but it's pecuniary externality to the extent that siting close to Burger King is going to reduce the demand to Burger King. So McDonald's siting its shop close to Burger King is causing externality to Burger King. But it will reduce the demand through the pricing mechanism, because if the two of them stay side by side, then they are going to compete for the customers. Competition for this customer will require that they reduce price so that they can attract the customers to their shops. And in this case, because it is the competition over price that will cause one to suffer from the externality, we refer to this as a pecuniary externality. And when pecuniary externality is concerned, we don't consider it to be typically market failure situation, because in this case, the effect passes through the market mechanism in terms of price adjustment or price differences. And we have what we call technological externality, where a third-party effect occurs outside the pricing system, either positively or negatively. Example is air pollution, water pollution. These are all kinds of technological externality. Taking the same example as the first one, if McDonald's emits pollution into the air and this affects the production possibilities of Burger King, then we can say this was technological externality. In this case, it is not the market mechanism that is determining the effect on Burger King, but it is the externality of emitting pollution into or pollutants into the air. So we can term this as a technological externality, whereas the first one is pecuniary externality. That said, as I said in the previous slide, we also have positive externalities where external benefits accrue to others. For instance, when an invention is discovered or somebody makes an invention, this has a benefit of enhancing the production possibilities of other firms. And we can refer to this as a positive externality. So it is also for innovation. Innovation also brings about some positive externality when other firms are able to use this innovation and then without paying for it or enjoying it for free. Then we say we have positive externalities. Education to some extent also offers positive externalities in that education will make it that once you are enlightened, you respond to others better. So your enlightenment as a result of your training through education becomes a positive externality to others. And so the saying goes that if you think ignorance is costly, if you think education is costly, try ignorance. I think that's it. We also have another type of externalities we call negative externalities, which are also referred to as negative external cost. We also refer to it as external cost or external diseconomies. For instance, smoking. When you smoke around people, they suffer negative externalities. Bad odor. Bad odor is a negative externality. Pollutants. When firms produce and they release pollutants into the atmosphere, it's a negative externality. Dumping of garbage around people's property. is a negative externality. Polluting water, especially in the case of galamsey in Ghana, where the galamseyers are only interested in the gold nuggets that they'll get from the soya. But the issue and meaning that they pollute water in the end. So the pollution of the water bodies is a negative externality. And we can have externalities in consumption. For instance, when somebody is smoking, it's an externality in consumption, a negative one, of course. Dumping of rubbish around somebody's property is an externality in consumption, negative one, of course. Driving your car or motorbike in the street where we have many pedestrians, or driving on the shoulders of the road is an externality, because you affect the pedestrian use of the walkways and etc. Listening to loud music also generates a negative externality to people, and these are all externalities in consumption. We also have externalities in production. And for instance, a firm that pollutes the air, this can affect the health and the environment at large. A firm that pollutes river bodies or lake, and this can affect the production possibilities of other firms or consumers. For instance, when those galamseyers pollute the river bodies, this can affect the production possibilities of fishermen or fisher folks. Why? Because those chemicals that they use, mercury and etc., can cause extinction of some fish species, and this becomes more or less externalities in production. And also, for instance, a beekeeper who has bee boxes close to an orchard. An orchard is a plantation where only fruits and sometimes flowers are grown. In this case, you see that the bees can easily fly onto those flowers or fruits and extract nectar, the sweet liquid from them, to produce their honey. And in this case, you see this is the kind of reduction externality. We have various variations of externalities as well. Something I would like you to try and find examples for yourself. We can have consumer-to-consumer positive externality, where the consumption activities of one individual affect positively the consumption activities or satisfaction of another individual. You can look for empirical or practical examples here for yourself when you go through the slides. Ordinarily, I would have make us to discuss this and come up with examples, but because of the way it's difficult, I didn't hear you, and some people didn't hear me, so I'll just explain and then go on. Consumption to consumption or consumer to consumer negative externalities also exist, where the consumption activity of one individual becomes a negative externality to others. This often happens sometimes even in class. You see that some people, their perfumes, the kind of perfumes that they wear, becomes more or less a negative externality to some people. You feel like vomiting, you feel very bad when some of those scents go into your nostrils. So that's the kind of consumer to consumer negative externalities. We can have producer to producer positive externality, where, for instance, two firms are producing in the same neighborhood and one decides to tar the road leading to the neighborhood. And this becomes producer to producer positive externalities. We can have a producer to producer negative externalities, where the production possibility of one producer influences or affects the production possibilities of the other producer positively, or sorry, negatively in this case. We can say that's also a kind of a variation of the types. Another variation of the type is from producer to consumer negative externalities, where the production activities of the producer generate negative externalities to the consumer. Generate negative externalities to the consumer. We can have the producer to consumer positive externalities as well, and where the production possibilities of a firm incurs a positive effect on the consumption possibilities of a consumer. So it's a reverse also. We can have consumer to producer positive externalities, and then consumer to producer negative externalities as well. These are variations of the positive and negative consumption and producer production externalities that I've explained to you already. Your role is to try to come up with examples, at least practical examples of each of these variations of the types. We proceed to look at externalities also having some characteristics of non-excludability and non-rivalriness as we study related to public goods. And for this reason, they are mainly on price. For instance, when external benefits are generated as a result, as an externality, people enjoy it free. You can't exclude it from enjoying it. And sometimes their consumption doesn't affect the consumption of others as well. So you see, externalities also have the non-excludability and non-rivalriness properties. So therefore, they can be unpriced, and this can lead to free rider problem where they consume it without paying for it. Market conditions also can make it that an individual of a firm may choose some level of activity that equates just his private marginal benefit to private marginal cost, with ignoring all the other marginal benefits that may accrue to other parties. In this case, we say we have positive externalities. The individual or firm is concerned about private marginal benefit and private marginal cost. So the individual or firm ignores the joint benefit to other parties or other consumers or bystanders. We call these positive externalities. And when positive externalities are in place, usually the private benefit is less than the social benefit. For instance, in education, what you gain from education is your private benefit. But what society benefits from is larger as a social marginal benefit, because the social marginal benefit comprises the private marginal benefit plus the marginal benefit that accrues to other parties. And therefore, always the social marginal benefit is higher than the private marginal benefit when we talk about positive externalities. In terms of cost, you also see that the private marginal cost will be greater than the social marginal cost when we talk about positive externalities. So it means the cost to society is higher than the problem that the private entrepreneur will face or private person will face. So if these conditions of positive externality exist, the market will underproduce. The reason the market will underproduce is because there are external benefits accruing to others who are not making payment for it or compensation for that. And therefore, the more the firm produces, the more that those people will enjoy the external benefits. So the incentive is that the firm must produce less and less as much as possible, so that those who are enjoying external benefits may come to a point where the benefits will run out over time. So when the market has positive externalities, where there are positive externalities, the market tends to underproduce. And they underproduce what is socially optimal. So for instance, under product mix efficiency, you recall that we say what is produced must correspond to what the consumers desire. So for instance, if the consumer desire that 50 units are produced, but as a result of positive externalities, the market is producing 40 units, then you see that this is market failure due to positive externalities and causing underproduction of such items. So I have a diagram here that demonstrates that. You see the demand curve that slopes downward tells you the private value or the private marginal benefit that accrues to the private entity. The supply function there shows the private cost which accrues to the private person. So for the private market to produce, they will take into consideration the private cost and the private value or private marginal benefit. So they'll produce the market level at Q market here and charge the price P. But as you proceed, you see that if there are external benefits, then the social value or the social marginal benefit will be higher than the private value or private marginal benefit here. So in this case, you see that the society needs more of that to be produced because of the external benefits. Once the external benefits come, they will benefit the society more. More people will enjoy, more people will be better off. So society will be interested in this case that the firm produces more. But the firm is only producing this level because of the positive externality. So what happens is it means the firm to produce, if the firm wants to produce the optimal quantity, it produces at the point where the social marginal benefit equals the private cost or the private marginal cost. Social marginal benefit equals the private cost or private marginal cost here. So in this case, the firm will produce Q optimum and then charge P star. So the increase we have here is as a result of external benefits. So these are the benefits that accrue to others which are not factored into the production possibilities of the one who is making the decision by considering his private value to private costs. And also, you see that when the market produces Q markets here and it charges P, and P is a way of underpricing, because if the market were to be producing optimum, the market has to charge P star. The P star should be charged because there are external benefits that accrue. And these external benefits, when they are factored into the benefit structure, it means that what the producer will receive will be higher than what is charging when it produces the market level of output. So oftentimes, if government want to intervene, government can intervene by granting subsidy to the individual that is producing this good for which there are positive externalities. So the level of subsidy that the government will grant will simply be the difference between the optimum price and then the price being charged by the competitive market. So to get this price, the P here, you can just put the Q, the quantity here, into the private demand market, the private cost function, and then you get this. And to get the price P star, you can just put the Q optimum into either the social value function or the private cost function, and then you get P star. We'll do a calculation based on that at the tail end of our lecture. So all that I've said there in the diagram is what I put here as some form of notes for you. The intersection between the supply curve and demand, the supply curve, and then the social value function or the demand curve, social value demand function is the optimal, determines the optimal level of output. But we know that when the optimal level of output is produced, this will be higher than the equilibrium quantity. So you see the optimal level of output here is higher than the equilibrium quantity that we have here as produced by the market. So the market produces smaller quantity than socially desirable. So you can see it here. The socially desirable level of output is Q optimum. but the market is producing less, smaller than that at Q market. So the social value of the good exceeds the private value of the good. You can see that also from here. You see that this social value function is higher than the private value function. So the social value exceeds the private value there. So also there is underpricing by the market due to the external benefits not included. So you can see also that the price charge here relative to P star is underpricing. So the firm is producing Q this market and charging P in the market. But for optimal production, it means the firm must be producing at this level and charging this price. So the difference between price here, if you give it as a subsidy to the producer, then the subsidy will make the person will increase the person's private value and make it in line with the Brown demand curve. So if you grant subsidies to the producer of this positive externality, what will happen is that this curve, this private value curve will shift to be parallel to the social value curve so that the optimal level of output will be produced and then the price will be. So in this case, what will happen is that the firm still charges a P when it produces the optimal level, but receives the subsidy of this equivalence that is added to the P so that you get P star. The firm still charges P but produces the optimal level of output. Then if you top up the P with the subsidy, the magnitude, the difference here, then that equates to P star, so that it then gives the optimal condition as far as the society is concerned, where the marginal social benefit equals the private cost, private marginal cost in this case. So what I've explained right now is internalizing the externality by granting per unit subsidies and what we call Pigouvian subsidies. Pigou is a scholar who came out with this idea of granting per unit tax and per unit subsidies to solve externality. So we oftentimes refer to this as Pigouvian subsidies or Pigouvian taxes. So the per unit tax must just be equal to the amount of the externality, external benefit to each unit. So you see that this difference is just the difference is also similar to the difference between, if you extend this line, the difference between the social value and then the private value, which is the measure of the external benefit. So if we use the primary method of attempting to internalize the positive externality, then there is need to grant a subsidy so that this subsidy will shift the demand curve, the private demand curve to the social value demand curve, so that social optimal level of output can be produced. I've explained that already. Another way by which sometimes this positive externality can be addressed is when we are in industrial policy environment. And in that case, patents can be granted to firms that come out with invention so that they can use the invention for a number of years before they make it available on the free market. In that case, you see that, as I've told you before, when we talk about monopoly market and then competitive market, you see patents contribute to monopoly structures, as I explained to you the last time when we're talking about incomplete competition or imperfect competition. You see that when we have patents lead to monopoly structures. So in this case, what will happen is that when a firm which has come with an invention is actually granted a patent, the firm acts as a monopoly. The firm becomes the single user of that invention for a number of years. So the monopoly can therefore reduce quantity and charge a higher price. So in this case, you see that the invention through patents, through granting of patents, the people will be able to produce the social optimal level because they can do that based on the market dynamics. Secondly, we can also talk about the negative externalities or negative negative diseconomies or external diseconomies here. When an individual or firm creates a damage or produces a disservice or disbenefit to other parties without having to consider the opportunity cost of inflicting this damage on the others. This is a case of negative externality. So in case of negative externality, only the private marginal benefit of the activity and the private marginal costs are equated. And in this case, the external cost to others, the cost to others are neglected. So this will make it that the private cost will be less than the social marginal cost. And therefore, in this case, the society is worse off if the firm produces more because it incurs a higher cost on society as a whole. And when negative externalities are concerned, the market often overproduce those items because the reason why they overproduce those items is because there's an incentive to overproduce. The incentive is that some other people external to the firm are bearing the cost of the firm's production without them being compensated for. So in this case, what will happen is that the firm has the incentive. The more they produce, the higher the external cost to others. So they do not affect them so much. So there's incentive to overproduce when we have negative externalities. So in as much as we have a discrepancy between private costs and social costs or private benefits and social benefits, there's bound to be this externality problem, and this can lead to overproduction or underproduction. Overproduction when we have negative externalities, and underproduction when we have positive externalities. So let's demonstrate that of negative externality. In this case, we have the supply curve, which denotes the private cost or private marginal cost. The demand curve here denotes the private value or private marginal benefit. So if the market wants to produce, it will produce Q market and then charge the price to be P, and that's the equilibrium. But we know that because of external costs, you see that the red line shows that there are external costs which has been added to the private cost. So when you add the external cost to the private cost, the curve moves upwards. So the higher curve here shows that the social cost is higher than the private cost. So when the social cost is higher than the private cost, then what will happen is that the firm will produce at the optimal level where we have Q optimum here and charge the price P star. So what is happening here is that because of the external cost that is factored into the social cost function now, the firm produced less of the output as optimum. So the firm will produce an optimal level, which is less than the market output or equilibrium output in the market, and then charge the price P. And the price, the difference between the private cost and the social cost or social marginal cost is referred to as the cost of pollution. If you talk about the aluminium production, for instance, or we can say that is the external cost. Then the piece chart there is under pricing. Under pricing because in this case, the firm is producing the equilibrium output and charging price this way, whereas the price that should be charged in the market if optimal level of output should be produced should be P star, but the firm is rather charging P. So this is under pricing as far as social optimum level of output is concerned. So the things I discussed here, you see that if you have the difference between P star and P becomes a tax that can be levied by government so that the firm is forced to produce the socially optimal level of output here. So look at it. If you grant this magnitude, this margin here as a tax, it will move the private cost function straight to join up with the social marginal cost. And if it moves this to join with the social marginal cost, the firm has no choice but to produce the optimum level of output here. So government can decide to impose the difference between P star and P as a tax on the producer. And this will become a cost to the producer. And if that is factored into the cost structure, then we have the private cost moving to coincide with the social cost. And what we are charging here as the tax is simply the difference, more or less the difference between private cost and social cost. And so you can have that also as tax. And this tax will make it that one, the firm will produce Q optimum, then will charge P, and then if the tax component is added, that will raise the price to P star. The firm produces the optimum, it charges P, and if this tax margin is added to this, then we have P star, which is the equilibrium price that should apply if we are producing optimum level of output in the economy. And in this case, the optimum level of output requires that we produce less and less of that. Why? Because there are external costs that are not factored into the private cost. And if these external costs are added to the private cost, then we have the social marginal cost. And the social marginal cost will make the firm to produce the socially optimal level of output as is required. So all that I've said there, I put it here, the demand curve and then the social cost curve determines the optimal level of output. And then the socially optimal level of output is less than the market equilibrium. Something you see here, you see socially optimal level of output here is less than the market equilibrium level of output. And then also the market underprices the good because the market does not fully incorporate the true social cost of production. The true social cost of production includes the external cost. And if the market does not factor that into the production function, the market will underprice. Remember, when we are in a market, usually the price that a firm charges is dependent on the cost of production of that firm. If the firm produces at a higher cost, the firm will charge a higher price. If the firm produces at a lower cost, the firm will charge a lower price. So in this case, once you've added the external cost to the private cost, the cost structure of the firm becomes higher. So what will happen? The firm has to charge a higher price. And if it had to charge a higher price, it has to produce a lower quantity. So this is how it works as far as the solution to the externality is concerned. If you increase the price, you can only sell lower quantity of units because the higher the price, the lower the quantity. So including internalizing the external cost will cause the cost level to rise and they charge a higher price and sell lower quantity, which will be at the level of what society will consider to be optimal. So we can also correct this by imposing per unit tax, which is just equivalent to the external cost on each unit of output. So when we want to internalize the externality means we want to factor the externality into the internal structures of the firm. So in this case, what will happen is that you can impose a tax, a per unit tax that is just equal to the magnitude of external effects, whether external cost or external benefit, in order to solve the externality problem. Achieving the socially optimal output here also will require imposition of a tax on the producer to reduce the equivalent quantity to the socially desirable level. I don't know the extent to which you have done your principles of economics in level 200, but you recall that anytime a tax is charged, a tax is imposed on the producer, the effect is that the producer reduces the quantity that it produces. I think you recall that if you have studied that in level 200. Now, this is another perspective as far as externality and inefficiency is concerned. But maybe let me pause for. Okay, let me handle this. Then when we go to solutions, then I take questions before I go to solutions to externalities. When there are externalities, usually the free market outcome is not efficient. Why is it not efficient? It's not efficient because the private marginal cost or private marginal benefit are not equal to the social marginal cost or social marginal benefit. So it cannot produce efficient output. And for instance, when there are consumption externalities, we have a marginal private consumer benefit. It's not the same as marginal social benefit. So there the market will not produce efficient outcome. Or when there are externalities in production, the firm's private marginal cost of production will not be the same as the firm's as the marginal external cost, marginal social cost of production. So again, you see that this divergence from the private and the social cost or benefit structure will cause the market to fail to produce efficient output. Fail to produce efficient output here means that the market will overproduce or underproduce. It will not produce the output for which we say this is the output exactly desired by the consumers, which is being produced by the market. So in that case, you see that we may not have the product mix market efficiency condition, which we studied under Pareto optimality. So the free market outcome doesn't equate the marginal social benefit to marginal social cost. It rather equates the private to private costs. And in this case, when this happens, we say there is need for some third party to enable the market to be able to work better. That third party can be government, and government can come in with what we call command and control policies or market-based policies. Example of market-based policies is what I have explained from the diagram, where we talk about per unit subsidies or per unit taxes, or what we call the Piggivian taxes or Piggivian subsidies, as far as those concepts are concerned. But when this externality solution exists, private solutions can also address the problem. But these private solutions can address the problem to the extent that it is possible to enforce such private solutions or to negotiate at a lower cost, such that those and there is some equilibrium as far as the people who are affected and people who are benefiting are concerned. So as a number of private solutions are: one, we can have moral codes and social sanctions for enforcing that the externalities are not created. For instance, example of enforcing social sanctions is if you live in an estate, sometimes generally sanctions are sometimes imposed on dumping of rubbish at inappropriate places, because that creates externality. So if you go to some community, you see they will write on the wall, if you dump a rubbish here, you pay 50,000 Ghana cedis. Sometimes you say, if you urinate here, you pay 1,000 Ghana cedis. Those are all forms of moral codes and social sanctions. And even if you live in an estate where they have walled the estates, all that, sometimes they develop moral codes which you are supposed to sign as an agreement before you purchase the house and you live in those estates. So those moral codes can make sure that people do not generate negative externalities. Then we can have a charitable organization, especially in the case of external benefit, marginal external benefit. You can have charity organizations that come in to support. If the charity organization knows that this you are producing will have external and marginal benefits to society, but it's not factored in, they can come and pay you some equivalence of the difference in price of subsidy so that you produce the socially optimum level of output, so that this will help the society to benefit more from the private activity of producing what you are producing that generates positive externalities. There can also be something like contracting between parties. Parties can come to agreement and enter into some contracts, and this can even move on to what we call mergers. For instance, if one firm production possibility or production activities causes a negative externality to another firm, one way of internalizing the externality might be, okay, let the two companies negotiate so that they merge. Once they merge, the external cost becomes internal part of the internal cost of the parent company, the merged company. So then we don't have any issue of externality. So contracting where we do some mergers and acquisition can also address that kind of scenario. Then I sent to you some write-up that I thought you should be able to read before today, because it's not any material that is so technical. It is just English, which you can read like a storybook, 2 pages. And I want to believe that you have read it. If you have not read it, it's also your cup of tea. The way you choose to drink it is yours. The cost theory says that it's a proposition that if private parties can bargain where bargaining costs are not high or cost of transaction is not high, they can arrive at efficient solutions to externalities on their own, especially when property rights are clearly defined. Put differently, this was an idea of Coase, another researcher, who argues that bargaining between individuals will achieve efficient solutions to externality type of problems if property rights are clearly defined. But the hidden condition here is that the bargaining must not happen at a very high cost. And when you are bargaining in which you have several individuals on the table, the cost of bargaining is very high. So in this case, you see, when we have several individuals that you have to bargain with, the cost of bargaining is high. So Coase theorem cannot solve that problem. But if the cost of bargaining, the cost of transaction is very low and property rights are clearly defined, then the Coase theorem should be able to resolve the externality. So what I've sent to you to read yesterday talks about a doctor who has relocated or has taken an office close to a baker. The baker makes a lot of noise. So here the baker is generating a negative externality to the doctor. So 2 solutions. The baker can be forced to buy a quieter machine so that when the baker is baking, no noise comes, and then the doctor can carry out his medical service provision in peace or with sound mind. The second solution is that if the baker doesn't want to buy the quieter machine or is not obliged to buy the quieter machine, then the doctor can invest into buying a soundproof to the office, so that even the baker is making noise, the sound will not come to disturb the doctor in the clinic or the medical facility. So if you look at this situation, you see that clearly, because there are only 2 individuals, bargaining can bring us to some point or can find a solution to this problem. We are told that in that case study, the quieter machine costs $50, and then the soundproof costs $100. So in this case, now whosoever has a property right can influence the negotiation process. But at the end of the day, the solution will be the same, whether it is the doctor that has the property right or is the baker that has the property right. The solution will be the same. So let's look at the tenets of what I told you to read. You see that if the baker has the property right, then the doctor must be compensating. Let's say the baker has the property right to make noise. Then the doctor has to be compensating the baker for this right, so that the baker can acquire maybe quieter machine, so the production process will not affect the doctor because the baker has the property right. In this case, what will happen is that the doctor is going to pay the baker the $50 because the baker has a property right to make noise, the doctor will pay the baker $50 to buy the quieter machine, so that once the baker buys the quieter machine, the doctor too is in peace, will have his peace of mind, because the quieter machine will not make so much noise, and the doctor cannot have his peace of mind. So that's one solution based on the fact that the baker has the property right. The doctor, if the doctor has the property right to quiet environment, for instance, then it is the baker that must be compensating the doctor for this property right. And the way the baker will compensate the doctor now is to go and buy the quieter machine. How much is the baker going to do that? Baker will use $50 to do that. So the baker has to buy the quieter machine, so that because the doctor has the property right to quiet environment, the baker will buy the quieter machine, and then this problem is solved. So you see, the solution to the problem has always been what? That the baker buys a quieter machine. So in this case, you see, the problem is resolved without even the government intervention. But in this case, the property rights must be perfectly defined and assigned. In this case, that is where government might come in to define the property rights. But it's not only government that can define the property rights. The property rights will also be acquired in advance. For instance, if the land acquired is the rental apartment of the doctor is acquired with this property right attached to it, then you see the solution, the second solution still comes in there, where the doctor will have to pay the nurse will have to, the baker will have to buy the quieter machine, so that it doesn't make noise that affects the doctor. So this is how the cost theorem works. The cost theorem here is working to resolve this problem, because the number of people involved are very limited. If you have a small number of people involved in bargaining, you can easily do that. So we say the transaction cost or the bargaining cost will be very low. But this solution will fail if you have several group of individuals that have to go into the negotiation. In that case, you see that the bargaining costs become quite very, very high. So if the bargaining costs are high and the property rights are not perfectly defined, in this case, you see that the cost theorem cannot resolve the externality. So in an exam, I may ask you, tell me two conditions under which the cost theorem cannot resolve an externality, or briefly explain two situations under which the cost theorem cannot resolve an externality. You should be able to say that when bargaining costs are high and property rights are not well defined, or property rights are not complete. So that is the gravamen of the document I've sent to you yesterday to read ahead of today's class. Now let's continue to look at the last but 3 bullet points. Sometimes private solutions do not always work. They do not always work, as I said, because of transaction costs, bargaining costs very high, and property rights not well defined. And in that case, we make a case for government intervention. So government can intervene through public policy, where government can come in to carry out. Government can come in out to carry out command and control policies to address externality, or market-based policies. Command and control, for instance, government can come in through regulations to forbid certain behaviors or to require certain behaviors. For instance, government can come in with a regulation to require all students to be immunized if the immunization of one particular student is creating a lot of positive externalities which is not being paid for, not being compensated for. Government can come in here and say everybody must be vaccinated, compel the people, pass the law to make sure they are vaccinated. This is the kind of command and control policy to address externality. We can also have a situation where government, through its vested institutions can establish quotas. For instance, the EPA can be made to sell quotas to firms so that they can generate external costs only to a certain level. Beyond that level, they have to pay for extra external costs, extra external costs that they generate or that results from their activities. This is what we call quotas. Sometimes, if they know that production more production is what to determine the extent of your emission, they can give you production quotas that you can produce beyond this quota. So when you produce up to that quota, you pollute the environment up to that quota, you stop there. Sometimes they create a market for these emissions so that you can go beyond your quota, but once you meet your quota, you have to go and buy the permit from others. For instance, if I have a quota to produce, let's say, 10,000 units of a commodity that will emit a certain level of pollutants in the atmosphere, and I exalt that quota of 10,000, I can, if there's market for such permits, I can go to another firm which has excess of such quotas and buy the quota from the firm. So it means that the other firm is no more going to pollute the atmosphere. They will only receive money from me as purchase of the quota or as purchase of the permit. Then I'll come and increase my production. So these kind of solutions are mainly command and control policies. But we can also do the market-based policies, as I've explained to you whilst I was looking through those diagrams. The market-based can require that government provides some per unit tax or per unit subsidies so that this can resolve the externality. And this per unit tax or per unit subsidies is what we call Pigrivian taxes or Pigrivian subsidies. So I've explained to you already how that mechanism forces the supply curve to coincide with social costs so that once Pigrivian taxes are levied, you see the firm adjusting its behavior of production to the optimal level, the socially optimal level, whereby externalities are internalized. We can also do a number of comparisons between the regulation and public and Pigrivian tax. If the EPA decides it wants to reduce the amount of pollution coming from a specific plant, for instance, the EPA could tell the firm to reduce its production by a specific amount, a regulation quota. Or the EPA can levy a tax of an amount for each unit of pollution the firm emits. And this is a kind of Pigrivian tax. So I've explained all this to you already. Just a recap. Then market-based policy. Sometimes it is also necessary, apart from levying taxes, for government to create a tradable market for permits or pollution permits. And what happens here is that these markets allow firms to buy pollution permits from the others. So that's like the situation I painted earlier. When you identify that one country or one firm has excess pollution permits, you can go and negotiate and buy the pollution permits from them. And therefore, when you buy it, it means that firm has no right again to pollute to the extent of the permit they have or they have been allocated or they bought. So it's the same situation where nothing changes, but one firm is having extra permits to pollute so that they can increase production to a certain level. There is this organization, I just forget, but there's this organization that policies the air and therefore is in the habit of selling carbon credits. Credit to emit carbon into the atmosphere for countries. So each country has carbon credits allocated and said that they want to control the extent to which carbon emissions are sent into the atmosphere. So there was it 2000 and thereabout, there was this news that the Deputy Minister for Energy then has procured 500,000 units of clean cooking stoves for for distribution to market women and extra all around. He made news, and the minister was taking all the glory for it. It was not that. It was Koreans who wanted to buy carbon credits from Ghana. Ghana, because we don't have a lot of industries, our carbon emission and etc. is low relative to Koreans and other advanced world. So the rule says that you can carry out an intervention that causes less emission to the environment, and then on the basis of that you can get carbon credits from the market for carbon credits. So that's what happened, and then you see they distributed all those stoves to people, because when we are using clean cooking stoves compared to charcoal or compared to firewood or fuel wood, you emit less and less smoke into the atmosphere than if you are using firewood. So in this case, giving out 500 clean cooking stoves causes Ghana to reduce emissions drastically. So this offers extra carbon credits to the Koreans. So that was what happened then. Many of you might have not known, because you might have just heard it and said, oh, these politicians. Summary solutions to externalities as a market failure problem. I've been running all this while, so let me pause for you to ask a question or your questions. Then I can run up with that one before we go to the calculation issues. So here we are. If you have a question, because it was raining, I was talking on top of my voice, and I even have challenges with speaking loudly. But thankfully, the rain has gone down slightly, so now we can take. Do you have a question, view, or comment you want to express? Please, you're welcome.
Hello, sir. Hello?
Hello, talk.
Yes. So when you were explaining I think the last chart on the private cost and the social cost, and you said the difference is the pollution cost. So I want to know, if government wants to impose tax on the firm, they normally measure it before imposing the tax, so that the tax will cause the private cost to move and get to the social cost, or they can just give any tax. If they give any tax and the tax is less, like if they add a tax component to the private cost and it is lesser than the social cost, I think that difference will benefit the firm, the producing firm.
All right, thank you very much. The government, through taxes, government have experts. Government has experts. Experts at the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, who are able to measure and determine exactly the extent of pollution or the extent of external cost that is generated. And it is the extent of the external cost that determines the tax. So you see that the tax, the magnitude of the tax should just ordinarily be the same as the magnitude of the external cost that is generated. So there are experts in the Environmental Protection Agency who have machines, sophisticated machines, to determine all those things and then levy the appropriate tax.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I want to find out whether we always have optimal production, since the private businessman is trying to make gain, while we the consumers, we are trying to benefit from what they are offering us. Our market optimal, or is real?
Markets may not be optimal when we have externalities. Okay. So in that respect, we expect some kind of government intervention or some solution so that the market become optimal. Optimal here simply means that the market is producing the quantity desired exactly by the consumers. Remember what we mean by the production mix efficiency. You remember? So that is where the issue lies. So markets can often be said to be suboptimal. Sometimes they produce suboptimal. Some markets can be optimal, especially those markets where we have many buyers and many sellers, and competition is very keen. And those markets, you are bound to have optimal levels per se. For instance, the wage market, shall we say, is very, very competitive in Ghana. Some competitive markets usually where we have many buyers, many sellers, that no single unit seller can influence price so much. These markets have optimum. They produce a market optimum. But there are many other markets where the suboptimal level of output is produced, either overproduction or underproduction. And in these markets, there is need for government intervention to some extent through Pigouvian taxes or Pigouvian subsidies to do that. If government doesn't want to come in with taxes and subsidy, because there is another school of thought that says, especially the Chicago school of thought says, government intervention may come with other distortions to the market, because taxes bring distortion. Subsidies also bring distortion to the market. So if that is the case, then government can sometimes decide to just create market for the externality, and then the participant in the market can, and in that case, when the government creates the market, it just allocate property rights or initial factor endowments, and then they can trade the production permits, and then in the market they will be able, the pollution permits, and the market they will be able to resolve issues of externalities, especially those coming from pollution. Yeah, any other question?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so I want to find out from you whether the well marketing companies and the consumers, can we classify them to be a competitive market?
I told you last time that they are not competitive markets.
Okay.
They often, especially the OPEC, oil marketing companies, blah, 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 they produce a lot of strategic behavior oftentimes. Sometimes they reduce the level of output to drive the price of crude oil up. They sometimes increase the price directly. Sometimes if they want to punish some member, they increase output so that the price level will fall, and that member will be making a lot of losses. And some of those things they do, so they can never be a competitive market.
Okay, thank
Any
you,
other
sir.
question from others in the class? I mean, okay, so in the absence of any other question, I'll proceed to look at summary of the solutions to market failure. We said government regulation by setting and enforcing quality standards and granting of quotas for production and etc. For instance, how EPA does in Ghana, and to some extent, Ghana Standard Authority ensuring quality, and those can be ways of making sure externalities are resolved, or externality problems are resolved. Government can come into taxes of what we call Pigouvian taxes and subsidies. It's also another way by which government can make sure the issue of externalities, especially negative externalities, are resolved. For instance, taxing the producer of negative externalities to discourage the producer from producing more of that, and granting subsidies to the producer of positive externalities to encourage the producer to produce more so that society will benefit more, since the production possibility or producing such goods will bring about positive externalities to the economy. Government assigning, defining, and enforcing property rights can also help address this issue of the externalities, like we see in the cost theorem, where if it is possible that bargaining costs will be very low and property rights are perfectly assigned, then bargaining or negotiation among private individuals can resolve the externality problem without government intervention. The government in the first place must be the one assigning the property rights, and so that they can be enforced legally. Create a market for the externality. Where there are no existing market for such externalities, government can create, or people can create the market for it. And once they create market for it, the participants in the market will buy and take action or market-based steps to ensure that they have the permits trading in the market, so that those who have the permit can sell if they believe that they are not going to reach that level. And that. Then private arrangements, like the situation of the cost theorem, where we say if bargaining costs are negligible, and we can use bargaining to internalize the externality based on who owns the property rights, and etc. And usually when you have such scenarios of the cost theorem, the solution is always the same. And like we see here, the solution is always the same. The solution is always that the baker must buy a quieter machine, whether the doctor has the property right or the nurse, the baker has the property right. Then measures I mentioned also, which can be a way of internalizing the externality, where, especially in the situation of firms, when one firm produces and its production becomes externality to the other firm, what will happen is that they can merge. When they merge, then the externality is factored into the internal cost structures or benefit structure of the firm. In this case, you see that we'll be solving the issue of the externalities. There we go. Now we want to talk about some of the summary notes from all that I'll be saying as far as externalities are concerned today. When a transaction between a buyer and a seller directly affects a third party without compensation, then we say the effect is externality. Negative externalities cause the socially optimal quantity in the market to be less than the equilibrium. So when we have negative externality, the market tends to produce less of the quantity than the level required. The socially optimal in the market is less than the equilibrium. Yeah, negative externality, you see the socially optimal is less. In other words, the market overproduces. Then positive externality, the socially optimal is more than the equilibrium quantity. Those who are affected by externalities can sometimes solve the problem privately, as the cost theorem states that if people can bargain without a cost, then they can always reach an agreement in which externalities can be effectively tackled, or resources can be allocated efficiently. Then when private parties cannot adequately deal with externalities, we call government to step in, and the government can either regulate behavior or internalize the externality through market-based situations like charging of acquisition tax or issuing of permits, or creating market for the permits so that there can be trading in the market. So that's the last point there. This is an analytical example that we have to look at, but I'll come back to you I'll solve the first question here from you. Then the second one, I'll leave you to go and try your hands on it, and then we'll see what's up later. When we have tutorial, I'll go over them again. I'll come back to the questions though. So, what is your problem, also?
So, please, I wanted to find out about the choice of buying the baker's machine. Is it because the cost is less?
We couldn't hear you. Your data was doing so repeat yourself. Also repeat yourself.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, repeat yourself. Please ask the question again.
I was saying that, yes, sir. I was saying that with the cost theory, because
It's
something
cost
I'm saying
theorem.
the cost theory.
Cost theorem.
Cost was less. Okay, so I'm asking if we chose the buying of the baker's machine because it is less than that of the soundproof.
No, it's not because it is less than per se, but because that's how the solution works. Usually, yeah, okay, the one who, yeah, usually the less one becomes more or less the solution, because that is where the market will be driving us to, because in bargaining, everybody wants to be better off, and the lesser the cost, the better the outcome. So maybe, but in this case, you see, it's always the quieter machine, probably because that is less. Ideas, I think, to some extent, to a large extent, the reason being that the doctor would have enforced the side that I'll provide a quieter, I'll provide the soundproof, if as of the time that he was supposed to compensate the baker for owning the property right. For instance, if the doctor were to have to spend $25 to buy the soundproof, you realize that the solution may shift to $25. So if the baker has the right and the doctor has to compensate, baker, you have to buy the quieter machine for $50. The doctor would think, okay, $25 will give me the soundproof, so I'll go for the soundproof. Then if the doctor were to have the property right, again, the baker is supposed to compensate the doctor. So the baker will now be thinking about, okay, for the quieter machine, I'll spend $50. For the sound proof, I will spend $25 if I have to compensate the doctor. So let me compensate the doctor with that amount so that he can. So I think the solution might always shift to, in this case, to the smaller cost of resolving the externality. So that also means that efficiency is achieved if the solution to the problem will always cost less of the alternatives that we have in the market. So there's some cost efficiency in there as well. Thank you for your question. Any other question? No? Okay, let's proceed.
Thank you.
As we always been saying, we make a strong case for government intervention in several respects in the market, and strongly where the market feels government intervention will be very necessary. But the fact is that though the market cannot or will not always produce socially desirable quantity of a good, the government intervention will be necessary in that case, necessary to improve welfare. And to improve welfare, government intervention must bring some kind of efficiency to the market. The kind of Chicago school of thought on government intervention that we studied. So intervention here should be able to produce some efficiency. But if government must intervene as well, government must be able to show that its intervention will produce something that will make people better off. And this means that there is always the need to find out if the cost and the benefits of government intervention will make any strong justification for such intervention. So we do what we call cost-benefit analysis, where usually the benefits are discounted over a number of years, the costs are discounted over a number of years. So we look at the cost and benefit of the intervention and we discount it, and then we find out if the present value of the benefit exceeds the present value of the cost, then we can say that there is some justification for that. So we can do some cost-benefit analysis to ensure we form scientific basis for government intervention in such respect. There is another one, they say cost-effectiveness analysis, CA. Cost-effectiveness analysis is also another means of trying to ensure that. But you must understand that there are a number of questions that we have to address when we are concluding some of these issues. One is that what market failure leads to, I'm doing some review, what market failure leads to a public sector to produce none more or less than socially optimal level of a good or service. None is public good situation, more is negative externalities, less is positive externalities. Question answered. What sort of government intervention is appropriate to ensure that the optimal quantity is produced? Yes, you can do Piggivian taxes or subsidies. You can also fall on command and command policies like regulation and quotas and some stuff. Is there a recommended government intervention likely to have? Is the recommended government intervention likely to have the desired impact? No, because of what we call government failures. And government failure usually is the inability of government action or intervention to enhance the efficiency of the market. And this inability of the state to achieve Pareto efficient outcome or redistribute income in a fair manner is called government failure. So the circumstances which made the market fail, coupled with some other peculiar characteristics of public sector, can also make government also fail in improving market outcome or efficiency of the market. So these issues that make the market fail, some of them include revelation of marginal benefits. From the market to work, marginal benefits for a good must be revealed. Once it is revealed, we see that it gives impetus to the private sector to know the payments or what people are willing to pay for such. So in that situation, you see that is what. But for governments as well, if they have to efficiently provide public goods, for instance, there is need for individuals to reveal their true preference for these public goods. But individuals know that revealing this true preference to government authorities will cause them to have some basis to tax them. So they are not willing to reveal such preferences. And this condition that makes a market fail can also make the government fail. Incompleteness of a market can make the market fail. For instance, market for insurance. The reason why insurance policies, policy owners usually are high risk one, is what affects the market, that if they want to provide insurance, by the private sector, it will happen at a very high premium. And charging a very high premium too is going to make you be susceptible to adverse selection. So you see, that's how it affects the market. But it can also affect the government the same way. If government is saying government is leading national health insurance like it does in the UK, where we have the National Health Service, you see that people who are coming for these insurance policies may not also review their true preference. And even if you cap the premium at an average like we have in Ghana, which is 72, or I don't know, which is a flat rate for as a premium, it also leads to misallocation in the market, because some people will pay that 72, they won't consume any medical service. Some people will also pay that, they overconsume 3 times that. So again, this condition of incomplete market can make the market fail and can also make the government fail in optimal provision of public goods such as insurance. Natural monopolies is also another situation. I don't want to worry about that here. So these instances will make some trade-off between efficiency and equity though. But there are other reasons also why government might fail, apart from those that make the market fail and also making the government fail. We can also talk about corruption. Corruption where we have government decision making that should make the right intervention to address market failures end up not addressing the market failure as should be. For instance, if government decides that we need 100,000 street lights and go through the process and all that, and due to corruption, only 50,000 is provided for the cost of 100,000. That's clearly a government failure. So the 50,000 that is not going to be provided now or produced now, although the money has been paid, is going to still lead the market to fail in those areas where street lights are needed. So you see, corruption can affect government intervention in the market to address provision of public goods, especially. There are also situations of agency problem where people are supposed to take action to ensure these market failure situations are addressed. Those who are supposed to take interventions on behalf of the government go in there and do their own thing. They have their self-interest, they are maximizing instead of the public interest in addressing the market failures. And because costless monitoring of these agents is not possible, it can also lead government to fail. Rent seeking is often, especially in our country, where political parties are funded by businessmen, and therefore, once the political party comes to power, they think that is their payday. So, when the procurement processes are rigged for them through the so-called sole sourcing or resisted tendering. When a party is in opposition, they'll be arguing everything. Sole sourcing should have been the norm, but it's rather the order of the day. And then when they come to government, you see more of sole sourcing than competitive bidding. And then they come and tell us foreign acquired asset English, and these kind of things do not help the country solve this market failure situation. So if you have these rent-seeking individuals who cloud government machinery and are in the habit of winning these contracts that are supposed to ensure that these market failure situations are addressed, you still have government intervention, but the market failure situation will exist. Then we talk about bureaucracies. Oftentimes, sometimes the public sector mode of making decisions is too red tapeism, is too cumbersome, bureaucratic bottlenecks everywhere. And this makes it that taking a decision to address the market failure promptly becomes sometimes a challenge. And this can also cause government intervention to fail. For instance, sometimes you see common regulatory decision that has to be taken. It takes a long time because you have to go through a very long bureaucratic bottleneck. And at the end of the day, this kind of red tapeism, there's something called red tapeism, affects the ability of the state to intervene in the market to correct market failure situations. And how do we address some of these government failure situations? Usually we say, okay, privatization. So where we say, oh, the private sector is better in making decisions, better in doing all this and that. But I realize also that the privatization has not helped us so much, because we privatize and we sell some of these things, and then we lose ownership, and at the end of the day, we don't get much for it. Then we fall for a variant of privatization we call public-private partnership, especially in the case of Ghana, and this is much more of a devil than privatization itself, where you see private entities and then falling on political parties decide to form joint ventures, and they virtually rob the state. Example is the National Identity Register stuff that we are talking about, where the data is available. We can just be it can just be transferred to an entity, and they'll use it to do. And then because of those kind of public-private partnership, and somebody in government is benefiting, all of us have to queue for one telecom or the other. Say we are registering our SIM card and all these things. It's quite noisy. It looks as if all the things that the theory or studies have proposed that will help countries to address some of these issues always fail for the case of Ghana. And I don't think we are getting any benefits from many of those stuffs, unfortunately. And that is my view. Of course, those of you are political, you can read whatever mean into it, but I'm academia, so I'm free to air my views, and whatever you say is your political view. Me, I'm also airing my view as an academia. I don't belong to any party. There are also mechanisms that we want to implement to achieve some of these government failures. For instance, establishing institutions or agencies that can monitor the delivery of these public goods or government interventions. But we realize that, especially for the case of Ghana, because our constitution concentrates a lot of power in the hands of the president, where he can virtually turn a woman into a man, it makes it difficult that almost all the head of these institutions that are supposed to hold government accountable are appointed by the president. And often, if you have a very bad president who appoints his family and friends to all these head of institutions and etc., you are not going to get any effective monitoring done for accountability to results. And even we say accountability can be enforced by parliament, but our parliament too is more or less a rubber stamp for the executive. Always the majority is always interested in pushing the executive agenda, whether good or bad. So at the end of the day, you don't see some of these institutions also doing that. And what we have witnessed recently is that anybody who is appointed to these independent institutions want to be very hard to ensure that the right things are done, monitoring is done, and people are brought to accountability. Immediately, you see the president scheming through their so-called secretaries and party activists to remove such people. And sadly, that has been the bane of accountability as far as our country, Ghana, is concerned. Re-election mechanism is also another mechanism to check some of these abusal of government interventions that are supposed to correct the market failure situation. But again, we see that in Ghana, especially where we have strongholds, many of the strongholds don't vote based on issues. So whether situations are bad or not, some of them, they only look at the picture of animals, some look at the picture of objects, and then they vote for those pictures without considering the situations in the country, without considering the extent to which promises made are delivered. And then all those things also make a mockery of the re-election mechanism as a way of holding government failure situations to check. And therefore, this means that we are between the devil and the deep sea. We are in a deep quagmire. And we only pray to God that one day we'll get results. All right, so this is how far we can go as far as this issue are concerned. I'm just going to do a number of things. I'll provide you a conceptual map of all that we have been so far. After that map, then I'll open the whiteboard where we solve the question that I was talking about. So if you look at the summary map, we started by looking at what we call market efficiency. And this market efficiency involves several respects, where we talk about efficiency in a single market where marginal benefit must be equal to marginal cost. We talk about efficiency in consumption where marginal rate of substitution for individual A must be equal to all the individual in the market. We talk about efficiency in production where the marginal rate of technical substitution must be equal for firm A, must be equal to that of firm B, must be equal to that of C, and etc. in the market. Then we talk about the fact that there must be product mix efficiency where the marginal rate of product transformation is equal to the marginal rate of substitution for all the consumers in the market. Then we said that these conditions can fail, and when these conditions fail to exist, we have what we call market failure. So in a situation where we have a market failure can be as a result, market failure can be as a result of a number of things. We talk about the situation of public goods. We talk about the situation of externalities. We talk about the situation of information asymmetry or information failure. We talk about the situation of imperfect competition. We talk about the situation of incomplete market. So in this respect, this one is what is it? Imperfect information. We talk about incomplete market. So this is how it flows. Then we say that when we have these conditions existing in the market, then there is a case for government intervention. And sometimes there's a case for private solutions based on certain conditions. So if you have that, we can further say there is what we call government intervention side. And government intervention will happen in terms of public provision. And public provision is where government pays for public goods. Government intervention can be in terms of taxes and subsidies. Taxes and subsidies for addressing income distribution situations, addressing redistribution of income, addressing externalities as in Pigrivian tax and Pigrivian subsidies and etc. Then we can talk about some issues about regulation. Government can also do some regulation. And also government can do some property rights, enforcement of property rights and contracts, property rights and contracts to be enforced. So these are ways by which government intervene in brief. Then we say these interventions can also fail, and when they fail, we have what we call government failure. And government failure situations can emanate from certain market conditions which make the market fail. So market conditions which make the market fail. I can also come out from issues such as corruption, issues such as agency problems, and then issues such as bureaucratic bottlenecks, issues such as rent-seeking behaviors, rent-seeking. So there we have it, and therefore we often say that because of these government failure situations, there is need always to do a certain CBA or CEA of government activities, government intervention, of government interventions. The